welcome back to Southern Chills, where I delve into the darkest corners of the internet to bring you spine-tingling tales. Tonight, prepare yourself for a mind-bending creepypasta that will make you question the nature of reality itself. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and grab a glass of your favorite drink as we let the haunting begin. I drove my car into the once abandoned lot and marveled at the amount of cars that were here. I recognized a few of them as they were some of my neighbors. A few of them waved at me and I returned the gesture. We pulled up into one of the allocated parking spots as I gazed up at the makeshift cinema screen that had been set up. It was just a massive sheet set up against the back wall, but it would fit its purpose. I smiled over at my girlfriend Chloe as she squeezed my hand, while my best friend Dave and his girlfriend Emily were noisily making out in the back seat. Chloe glanced towards them and I was barely able to suppress my laugh as she rolled her eyes. My attention was drawn to the screen as the movie commenced. Chloe snuggled up against me and I kissed her forehead as we sat back and enjoyed the movie. The movie was maybe a quarter of the way through when I noticed the yellow mist floating around the car. I almost let out a shriek as I saw a pair of red eyes peering back at me from the mist. There was a grumbling beside me, and it took me a few seconds to notice that the movie had stopped, and that was almost eerily silent. We all spun our heads to our left as someone let out an ear-splitting scream that sent silent. I could feel clothes shaking against me as I began to try and start the car. I began to panic as nothing was happening. As more and more screams could be heard in the distance, Chloe grasped my hand in an almost vice-like grip while staring straight ahead. I followed her gaze and my blood ran cold as dozens of red eyes started staring back at us from the mist. I couldn't see what their bodies looked like, as they were shrouded in the mist. I heard the grumbling behind me and barely had time to react as Dave opened his door and stepped outside. He obviously intended to run, but he had only gotten a few steps before something latched onto him and pulled him to the ground. He began letting out an ear-splitting scream, and I had to cover my ears to block out the noise. It went silent a few moments later as Emily sobbed in the back seat. I was about to urge her to shut the passenger door when something was flung inside and landed in her lap. Her eyes rolled back in her skull as she lost consciousness. While I stared at Dave's decapitated head, which was laying in her lap, I reached back and flung it back out the door. I was about to try to close the door when a long, bony hand began inching forward towards Emily's unmoving body. Chloe began shouting at her to wake up as more and more hands began appearing, each of them covered in a coarse black hair that was as dark as midnight. The first hand reached her and began gently caressing her skin. The others followed suit, and soon her entire body looked like it was getting a massage. Her eyes fluttered open, and I could see the panic in her face as she noticed what was happening to her. She began kicking and punching at the hands to try to get them away from her. She turned to us with a pleading look on her face, moments before she was dragged from the car. My heart was pounding in my chest as I finally managed to get the door closed. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably beside me as I looked around us to see if there was anyone else in any of the nearby cars. Every single one of them was empty, and I could see bloody handprints on the nearest car. I motioned for Chloe to be silent as I thought I heard something. We sat there silently as something scraped the side of my car. I flinched away as the scraping took on a crescendo as it sounded like hundreds of people were doing it. Chloe covered her ears and began rocking back and forward while I tried to think of a way out of here. I remembered too late that we hadn't thought to lock the doors. As her door was torn open, I didn't even have time to shout a warning as the hands shot forward and attached themselves to Chloe's legs. I grabbed onto her arms and began pulling in a desperate bid to save her. It was an impossible task, as whatever was out there was immensely strong. Chloe's eyes met mine for a moment, and she gave me a sad smile, just as my grip failed and she disappeared into the mist. A fountain of blood sprayed towards me, and I was instantly drenched in her blood. I climbed into the back seat and began tugging at the seat, and let out a scream of joy as it opened and I managed to crawl into the boot. I looked back and spotted the red eyes staring at me through the windscreen before slamming the seat back in place. I could hear howls outside as the car began shaking as they tried to find a way to get to me. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is waking up to see sunlight coming in through a few cracks. I cautiously opened the boot and peeked out and felt a wave of relief roll over me, as there was no one else here. The mist and its inhabitants had left while I was asleep. I climbed out and gazed around at all the empty cars. I turned my head towards the screen and my blood ran cold as someone had written out, "To be continued," in body parts.